Agent Tralla burst onto the bridge of the Ranakur as the ship shook once more. There was a flurry of activity as the pilots pushed the ship to dodge incoming fire, and the gunnery personnel tried to get a clear lock onto the vessel. "What in Gavik's name is going on?" Tralla demanded, her feathers frilled. The captain, Greenock, turned his head, a noticeable grimace on his reptilian face. "We found them, the last human warship, but they are making things far more difficult than they should be." Tralla's avian eyes widened. Decades ago, humanity was defeated and enslaved save for a few 100,000 who escaped into the void. But there were stories that a single human warship survived. Slaves called it the Defiance. Tralla shook her head. "Then what is taking so long? It is a third of our size," she asked. Greenock sighed. "I was a fighter pilot at the Battle of Seoul. The coalition fleets drastically outnumbered the humans. We had them cornered and outgunned, or so we thought." He turned back to look at the screen displaying the Defiance. "Our armada suffered at 90% casualties. Our ground forces suffered far worse at 95%. The humans made us pay, what they call a butcher's bill." He stood slowly and pointed at the screen. "That very ship destroyed a battlecruiser. We are lucky to be in a patrol cruiser." He grimaced again and dropped his arm to his side. Tralla had heard stories, but never had the clearance to verify. Well, at least she might know now. She turned to focus on the ship on screen. It was very aerodynamic and sleek-looking, and in the shape of a dagger. Its hull was painted a dark gray and with red markings scattered across it. The thing that caught her eye was the gold letters, clearly spelling Defiance in human. Then, without warning, the human corvette-sized ship stopped. "Evasive actions!" Greenock practically screamed. The ship lurched up and over the Defiance before Tralla saw a moment of realization, quickly followed by terror wash over Greenock. Then it hit her. The human warship was behind them! The Ranakur shook violently as an alarm blared and the main power failed. The emergency power flickered to life just moments later. Greenock, who had been knocked to the floor, stood up. "Status report," he demanded. "Main reactors down. Secondary reactor at 35%. Weapons are down as well as shields. Called a technician. We've lost the main engineering section and have hull breaches on multiple levels. We have suffered at least 40% casualties. Reports are still coming in." Called another. "Sir, secondary reactors going critical," the first technician cried. "All hands abandon ship," Greenock shouted. Before Tralla could say anything, she was practically being dragged from the bridge. Tralla waited by the last escape pod for Greenock. Only a few of the remaining crew wished to remain to wait for their captain. Greenock entered the room and tacked Tralla into the pod before slamming his hand on the launch button. He stood and pulled Tralla up. "Sorry, Agent Tralla, but we need to get as far away as possible. Why didn't you leave?" Tralla brushed her feathers off. "We weren't going to leave you to die." There was a sound of assent from the others in the pod, now 12 in total. Before anyone could do or say anything, the pod jolted and started moving in a different direction. "A tractor beam," Tralla said nervously. "It must be the humans." She pulled her laser pistol while the Greenock opened the weapons compartment and distributed the laser pistols to the rest of the crew in the pod. Eventually, they began to feel the gravity increase. It wasn't life-threatening, but enough to make everyone unsettled. Once they stopped moving and the pod had settled in the human ship, Tralla heard footsteps approaching the door. "Get ready," Greenock said calmly. Then the edge of the pod's hatch turned yellow before spewing sparks, the sparks moving in a circle until the entire hatch had been cut. There was a moment of silence before the hatch was pried from the pod with a loud asterisk, thud asterisk. "My name is Captain Rodney O'Malley. If you lay down your weapons and step out of the pod with your hands up, you will be treated as prisoners of war under our Geneva Convention," declared a male voice. Tralla was about to object when Greenock stopped her and placed his pistol on the ground. "What are you doing?" Tralla whispered demandingly. Greenock shrugged. "I know of this convention, and as we are all uniformed personnel, we will be treated relatively well, especially since none of us committed any war crimes by their rules of war. It would be best if we surrender. Now do it." The others dropped their weapons, hesitantly followed by Tralla. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said skeptically. Greenock smiled and stepped out of the pod. "My name is Captain Greenock of the Nil clan. Me and what's remaining of my crew surrenders," he declared. Tralla followed him and stared at the team of heavily armed human marines, as well as two humans who were dressed differently. One a young-looking male dressed in a long black coat with the front undone showing a gray shirt. He had a patch of black fur on his head, mostly covered by a strange hat. The other was wearing a white coat with a red marking on her arm. On her head was long, flowing brown hair. Greenock, Tralla, and the others slowly approached the group of humans so as to not cause alarm. Once they were 5 paces from them, they stopped. The young-looking male, Rodney Tralla assumed, smiled, displaying fangs. "If you have any injured, Dr. Lisa here can tend to them." He gestured to the woman in white, then his hand swung around to a human marine who took his helmet off, revealing orange fur and a spotted face. "Those who are not injured will be cuffed and led to the brig by my cousin, chief of our Marine detachment, Master Chief Calvin Blair." Tralla paced back and forth in their cell. It had been decided that the crew in each pod would be placed in a cell due to a lack of space. Since their capture 3 days ago, they had received all the amenities Greenock said they would under human rules of war. Still, though, Tralla didn't like the situation. Every day, a few prisoners would be escorted from their cell for what was undoubtedly interrogation. Yesterday, Greenock went and returned not long after. "Excuse me, Miss Tralla, follow us!" Tralla jumped slightly as the human marine spoke, practically appearing from nowhere. The cell door opened. Tralla stepped out tentatively and began to walk in between the human marines. They left the brig and continued down the hall, and as they went, she began to hear a strange sound. The further they went, the louder it got. At first, she believed that it was a torture device, but it sounded so surreal and elegant. Finally, at the sound's peak, she took a risk and stopped, gazing around until her eyes fell upon a room labeled Mess Hall. Inside, she could see Captain Rodney holding something made of wood and drawing another piece of wood against it. The others in the room either sat and listened or moved around in a rhythmic fashion with each other. A soft chuckle brought her out of her observation. "I know that you want to listen more, but we need to keep moving," the Marine behind her said in a feminine voice. Tralla glanced at the Marine and clearly saw that, yes, the Marine was a human female, judging by the shape of the body anyways. She turned back down the hall and continued, noticing the sound disappear slowly and finding herself strangely missing it. Finally, they reached their destination, a room that was labeled Ship Counselor. The door opened and the Marine in front of her motioned for her to step inside. When she did, her eyes fell upon a human wearing simple clothing holding a clipboard. Their skin was a dark brown, and he had black fur on his head and face. "Hello, my name is Dr. Henry Whitkins, and you must be Agent Tralla of the Coalition Criminal Investigation Service, correct?" he asked, offering her a seat across from him. "Yes, that would be correct. How did you know?" Tralla asked, taking the seat. "We managed to download a full crew manifest from the life pods," he stated nonchalantly while taking his own seat. "Now, first and foremost, do you own any slaves whatsoever?" "No, slaves are only for the immensely rich and powerful," she replied. "All right now, has anyone a part of this ship's crew mistreated you or others?" he asked simply. Tralla thought for a moment before replying. "No, as far as I can tell, we have been treated well." "Next question, is there anything that you are lacking?" he continued. "No, though it would be nice to have more room to move around and exercise," Tralla stated. "I will bring it up with the captain, but I cannot promise anything," he declared. "Now, for the final question, do you have any questions?" Tralla thought for a moment. She had many but didn't want to upset Dr. Henry with a few of them. "Okay. First, where are you taking us? Second is what you plan on doing with us. And finally is what was the captain doing in the mess hall? And how was he making that sound?" The first and second questions were practical. The last was to satisfy her curiosity. Before Henry could reply, a female voice filled the room. "Dr. Henry, have you seen Calvin? He was supposed to meet me at the mess hall?" she asked. Henry rolled his eyes with a soft smile before pressing a button on his desk. "No, Irene, I haven't, though I'm willing to bet that he is just running late or got caught up in some work. Honestly, I kind of feel bad for him being press-ganged by you so much," he finished with a chuckle. "I do not press-gang him, he owes me a dance. Wait, I see him coming down the hall, bye," Irene declared. "Lord help that boy," Henry said with a hearty laugh before turning back to a confused Tralla. "The answer to your first question is confidential, but you'll find out in a few days. The answer to the second is that we will offer your return in exchange for an equal number of our fellow humans, as well as that of your fellow crew. The answer to your last 2 questions is pretty simple. Rodney was performing a little concert for the off-duty crew and was playing his violin. The man has great skill in it, especially for swing music," he explained. The rest of the interview went along without much issue, and Tralla was escorted back to her cell. On her way back, she did manage to listen to the captain play his violin. When she chanced to glance inside, she caught a glimpse of the Marine leader, Calvin, nervously dancing with a young human female with short black fur, who looked ecstatic. Upon her return to the cell, Greenock approached her. "So, how did it go with Dr. Henry?" he asked. "Well, I learned a bit about our captures, specifically the captain and his cousin, but none of it is relevant or useful in our situation, besides the fact that they plan to exchange us for humans that are enslaved," she explained. Well, at least it went relatively well then," he said, and walked back to where he had been sitting. Trayla just turned around and tried to listen for the entrancing sound of the violin again, but she couldn't hear it. It had been a few days since the last of the interviews. They had finally been permitted to utilize the ship's exercise room, though only under armed guard. Though through it all, she could feel a conflict growing inside her. Ever since she was just a hatchling, she had been taught that humans were vile and were an evil race that had to be enslaved in order to stop their genocidal and expansionist ways. Now, however, she was unsure. "All right, class, today we will finally learn about the Sol Coalition War," my teacher declared. The class instantly fell silent. As per regulation, lower classes were not taught about the war until they reached the proper age, so to say that we were all eager would be an understatement. To begin, I should explain why humanity was even allowed to become a threat in the first place. You see, when the Coalition first came into contact with the Empire of Sol, we were in a major crisis. We were facing incursions from an intergalactic devouring swarm, and the Empire of Sol was seen as a necessary evil. At the time, we were correct. Human forces, different technology, and ingenuity showed itself to be the tipping point. That war came to an end when a human general named Aaron Ricker led a suicide mission to kill the swarm's hive queen and succeeded. My teacher finished his explanation, eyeing the class to ensure that everyone had listened. I saw a hand rise out of the corner of my eye. My teacher nodded towards the student. "Is that why there is a statue of 5 armed humans in front of the Coalition headquarters?" the student asked. Yes, it was heavily debated whether or not the statue should be removed after the Sol Coalition War, but after evidence was found that Aaron and his troops were sent for trying to warn us about their empire's later plans, it was decided to keep it, our teacher explained. Now, on to the reason for the Sol Coalition War. The Sol Empire had declared war upon the Trilax for supposedly attacking a mining colony. However, when the Coalition requested to send an impartial investigation team, the humans refused and attacked a major Trilaxian colony, killing everyone and everything on the planet. Quickly, we realized that the humans were lying and attempting to violently expand. Unfortunately, the Trilaxians were wiped out before our armada could launch a counterattack, our teacher explained with a heavy sigh. Once our armada was ready, however, we immediately attacked Sol and decimated their fleet when they returned from Trilax Prime. After that, we launched our ground invasion, capturing their emperor and the nobility. However, as we began enslaving them, as was the punishment for such action, many escaped with the help of a human warship and transport fleet. To this day, they attempt to harass the Coalition, but are easily driven off. Our teacher finished with a sip of his Grand. Now, however, Tralla was noticing a distinctive lack of senseless murder, and indeed, a great deal of restraint from those who are visibly angered by their presence. Now things were making less and less sense. She huffed and began her run on the treadmill. Greenock continued his steady breathing as he lifted the heavy weights again. This situation was bringing up many memories, all of the war and none that he liked. Watching his clanmates get obliterated in space and in the atmosphere of Sol 3. Certainly not the campaign against the Trilax, who had sided with the United Nations of Sol in their war of aggression against the Coalition. "We've just lost Wings 7, 3, 9, and 4, I declared, terrified. "Keep your head, Wing 5. We put down the Trilaxian traitors, and we'll put down these upstarts as well," Wing Leader declared to me. We were the last of our wing and had just chased 2 human Drake fighters into the atmosphere of Sol 3. The moment we did, however, we were met with intense and accurate ground fire. We continued to pursue the Drakes through the skies, narrowly dodging incoming ground fire. We followed them through a cloud, but when we came through the other side, there was only one. I checked my aft camera and saw the Drake appear behind me. "Wing 5, break off to the left and draw that one away. Once I finish this one, I will return and destroy that one," my wing leader ordered. I hesitated for a moment. I was very terrified of the thought of being chased, but orders were orders. "Copy, Wing Leader," I declared with false stoicism and bravado. I broke off and took some precautionary evasive maneuvers, but noticed a distinctive lack of enemy fire. I glanced back at the aft camera and noticed, to my horror, that the Drake was chasing my wing leader. Before I could turn back to assist, I saw my wing leader's fighter turn into a bright blue fireball, Now I was alone. I took further evasive actions as the drakes turned their attention towards me. I knew that I wouldn't survive trying to dodge their fire and the ground fire, so I tried to make for space again. At least there I could get some help. As I tried, however, I heard the alarm. I knew that this was the end, because their missiles never missed. Slamming my hand on the eject button, my cockpit broke off and rapidly fell towards the ground, its thrusters damaged by the explosion of my fighter. I awoke on a human bed, with bandages wrapped around my right arm, legs, and head. They had treated my wounds. Why? You're finally awake. I am Dr. Lisa Jones. I wanted to ensure that you were awake before I left. You have been unconscious for about 5 days. At first, we weren't sure if you would wake up, the human doctor, Lisa, said before turning to leave. I grabbed her arm lightly, stopping her. Why? I asked with a rasp. She removed my grip gently and gave a faint smile. Because of our rules of war and what we do, we know many of you are here under false pretenses, and we don't hold it against you, only your leaders, she said before leaving. I looked around and saw a few other wounded coalition troops and began to wonder. Later that day, we were liberated by our ground forces. Greenock grunted as he finished his last rep. He sat up and repressed a sigh. He felt guilt over what he had done. Once he discovered that they were being sent to find and ambush the Defiance, he had leaked the information to a human slave and ensured that the humans were ready. He caused the deaths of many of his own crew, and for that he felt guilty and ashamed, but he had to repay the humans for the kindness that they showed him and others, even at the end. Dr. Whitkins ate his food quietly in the mess hall. He had felt a great deal of confliction with the arrival of the prisoners. He was just a boy when the coalition attacked Earth, but he remembered everything, especially the last time he saw his father. Now listen, Henry, you be good for your grandpa, all right? My father said calmly. I wiped more tears from my eyes. But Dad, why can't you come with us? I don't want to lose you like Mom, I cried. My father knelt down and pulled me into a tight embrace. Son, you will never truly lose us. We will always be with you, in your heart and mind, he said in a somber tone. My father had always tried to be stoic around me, trying to teach me that I had to be strong at times while also being caring. But I couldn't help but notice as I felt his tears trickle onto my shoulder and back. He pulled back and wiped his eyes. Your mother and I love you, Henry, and remember, forgive them, for they know not what they do, he said, standing up again. I will, and I love you guys too. I sobbed as the doors of the landing craft sealed shut. My grandpa put his hand on my shoulder and pulled me close. Don't worry, we'll see them again, he said soothingly. All these years, and he still remembered. A part of him hated the coalition races, but another part recognized that they were lied to, and the generations that came after were brainwashed into believing those lies. Still, he was surprised to learn that Captain Greenock was once a patient of Lisa. She had told him over lunch the day after they were captured. He already knew that one of the crew of the Ranakur had warned them of their attempted ambush, and after his interview with Greenock, he suspected that he was the traitor. Either way, their fates would be decided once the Reach knew Sol. Dr. Jones took a bite of her scrambled eggs. To say that she was surprised to see a patient of hers all these years later would be an understatement. She still remembered the day he was brought into her ward. She was told that he managed to eject from his fighter, but his pod had a rough landing. All right, Devin, I need you to set his femur back into place. Then we can begin to fix that up. Janice, get started on cleaning that gash on his arm, then start closing it. Frank, get the anesthesia. He may be unconscious, but this will hurt, and we don't want him to wake up from the pain. Beth, prep his right leg. We are going to need to remove that piece of shrapnel once the rest of his injuries are taken care of. I'll take care of that gash on his head, I ordered. The others performed their tasks. Once I finished bandaging his head, I moved to help Devin finish the Garaxian's broken femur. Upon finishing that, I moved to help Beth while Devin helped Janice. Frank, having finished his job, moved to the next patient. Once we had finished and had him stabilized, we all moved on to other patients. Over the next few days, the other patients had been stabilized and awake, but he hadn't. But before I had to leave, I took a glance back at him to see that he was awake and confused. Ah, you're finally awake. I am Dr. Lisa Jones. I wanted to ensure that you were awake before I left. You have been unconscious for about 5 days. At first, we weren't sure if you would wake up, I said before turning to leave. I was stopped, however, when he grabbed my arm lightly. Why? He croaked. I removed his grip gently while offering him a faint smile. Because of our rules of war and what we do, we know many of you are here under false pretenses, and we don't hold it against you, Only your leaders, I said gently before leaving. Once I closed the door to the war behind me, I stepped on board the transport and heard the door seal shut behind me. Lisa sighed through her nose. She didn't expect to see him again. Deep down, she hoped that he was the one who warned them. She didn't know why, but the thought of him potentially saving her life gust as she and her peers saved his made her chest tighten in a way that she couldn't explain. She needed to talk to Whitkins soon. Maybe he would know. Rodney shot up from his bed, drenched in sweat. He swung his legs over the edge and stood up. It had been 3 years, and he still had nightmares about her. He hated it when Henry was right sometimes. Rodney grabbed a clean towel and entered his shower. As he cleaned himself, he continuously had flashbacks to her and what happened that day. Once he was done with his shower, he started getting dressed only to be interrupted halfway through by the distinctive voice of Irene. "Hey Cap, we have arrived at Secbus 6. Do you want me to get Cal to assemble an away team?" she asked cheerfully. Rodney shrugged and continued to get dressed. "Yeah, oh, and have him see if any of the prisoners want to help. And I'll be ready to go in a few minutes." "You sure that's a good idea?" she asked, concerned. Rodney sighed heavily. "You know why I have to go. And as for the prisoners, you know what will almost certainly happen to them once we get to New Sol. So we might as well get them used to helping out." "All right, I'll tell Calvin," she declared, ending the call right after. Calvin entered the brig, helmet in one hand, rifle in the other. He took a look around and immediately saw the terrified expressions on many of the Ranicor's crew. He let out a sigh and took in a deep breath. "Calm down. None of you are going to die. I am here under orders to see if anyone would like to volunteer to help with some hard work. Help us get done faster," he declared loudly. "What?" a prisoner asked, Tralla if he remembered correctly. "Well, we are at this planet to gather some supplies that had been abandoned here by pirates, and Rodney wanted me to see if any of you would be willing to help," Selvin explained. For a moment, no one said or did anything until Greenock stepped forward. "I'll go." Calvin nodded and had one of his troopers open the cell door. "Anyone else?" he asked. Several others in the cell joined their captain, including Tralla. After a few others from other cells volunteered, Calvin counted the volunteers and left him with a total of 10. They all left and made for the hangar, as Calvin tapped his comm on his helmet. "I need 10 sets of environmental gear for the volunteers. It should all be in their pods. I'm sending the info now," he ordered calmly. The group continued into the hangar. The volunteers stopped upon seeing the sizable group of human marines and spare personnel. Calvin continued until he was a few feet away from Rodney and saluted. 10 prisoners volunteered to join us on the away mission, sir," he declared. Rodney turned around. "Good, get them in the enviro gear and left go," he ordered before putting on his helmet, which created a hiss as a seal was formed. Tralla sat in the human, light freighter as it descended upon the planet. She hadn't expected her captors to ask for help, or the large number of armed humans that would be joining them. If she remembered from her lessons, the humans had brought a company-sized element of Marines and another company-sized element of the ship's crew, all of which were armed. She definitely didn't expect the human Captain Rodney to be joining them. "All right, boys and girls, welcome to paradise," came the pilot's voice over the intercom. The ship came to a thud as it landed. "All right, Marines, you know the drill," Calvin called as he and his troopers moved to the 2 smaller doors on either side of the cargo bay. The Marines stacked up at both doors and waited. Suddenly, the lights at the doors turned red and opened. The Marines poured out of the ship, and silence followed. After what seemed like an eternity, Tralla sighed as the cargo bay door opened, and a ramp lowered onto the landing platform. The Defiance crew began to move off the ship, followed by her and the other volunteers. Upon leaving the ship, she took a look around as her environmental suit began providing readings on the atmosphere and potential points of interest, one of which was the large base they had landed at. "All right, I want the platoon of the ship's security to stay here and hold the landing platform and ship. The other platoons and volunteers will wait here until the Marines complete their sweep of the base," Rodney ordered over the comms channel. "Sir, my scanners are picking up an active power source approximately 6.23 miles to our 330, called someone. Rodney grabbed a pair of binoculars and scanned the direction indicated. After a moment, he huffed. "All right. I want some volunteers to join me to check that out. Could be something useful," he called. A few raised their hands, and Tralla found herself doing the same, as well as another volunteer from her crew. Rodney looked at those who wanted to go and waved for them to follow him. "You all know the drill from here. Calvin is in command," he stated, walking back into the ship, pressed a button on the cargo bay wall as he went. A moment later, an 8-wheeled vehicle was lowered onto the ground. Tralla examined it as it was released from a set of clamps. It looked to be well armored, and had a turret on top that had a human cannon as its armament. As she followed Rodney to the back to see a sealed door, he pressed a button on his wrist, and the door opened, lowing into a ramp. Everyone piled in, the door sealing behind them. Trela looked around. In total, there were 7 in the vehicle. All right, Takashima, you and Diaz are on turret. I'm driving. Casto and Sergios stay back here with our guests and strap in, Rodney declared as he opened another door, where he, Takashima, and Diaz entered, before the door closed behind them. The vehicle roared to life as it began to move forward. Trala sat down and strapped herself in. The other volunteer doing the same beside her, she looked at him and realized he was a Nerg. "What's your name?" she asked him. He turned and cocked his head slightly. "My name is GOG Agent Trala," he stated matter-of-factly. Trela nodded and tried to remember. The name was familiar to her. After a few minutes of thinking, it hit her. "You were one of our ship's security detail? Third in command of it, right?" He nodded, but before he could say anything else, a pair of laughing humans cut him off. "Something funny?" he asked, irritated. "Nah, in fact, we're pretty happy at the coincidence," Casto said, catching his breath. "Yeah, whenever the captain goes on an adventure, something fun is bound to happen," Sergios continued. "Like what?" Trala asked, amused. "Well, last time I joined the captain for one of his little adventures, I nearly got eaten by a swarm of ratagids," Sergios said, laughing. Trala and Gog turned to each other as the vehicle's speed began to pick up. Calvin and his troopers opened the main doors to the facility. Weapons trained down the hall. They began to sweep the hall to ensure it was completely clear. Once they reached the end of the long hall, they prepared themselves to open another large door. If the scans were to be believed, then there should be a large plaza on the other side. The Marines all had their designated sectors of fire. Now it was the moment of truth. Lance Corporal Keela finished hacking the door controls. She backed up as the door began to open, hissing and groaning the entire time. Everyone prepared themselves for the potential firefight, only for nothing to happen. "First platoon, take up positions on the right. Second, you have center. Third, take the left. Fourth platoon will hold this hall." He ordered over the internal comms. The Marines did as ordered and began to secure the other side of the door. Calvin followed them in and took a long look around the room. It was empty, but trashed. He looked up and saw that many of the panels on the ceiling were damaged from energy weapons. The same for the walls and even the floor. "Looks like there was a battle here. Fan out and clear this plaza. If you locate any dead bodies, tag them with a chem light, eyes peeled and heads down," he ordered. They swept through the plaza. Every door they found was marked and secured by a fire team. Once the whole plaza was secured, Keela approached Calvin. "Report, Keela, what do we got?" Calvin asked. "Well, there are 4 doors including the one we came in from. All are secured. No bodies, but a few energy weapons were found, along with quite a few dried blood splatters," she answered. Cal looked around again before grunting. "So whatever fight that happened here was between someone using energy weapons, the pirates most likely, and something." "Something?" she asked, puzzled. "No bullet holes or casings," he stated matter-of-factly. "Radio the landing pad. I want sensor brought in here. We scanned the layout of this place, but I want an in-depth bioscan. Something isn't right about this." Keela nodded and left. A short while later, a biosensor was brought into the center of the plaza. Once activated, it began scanning the facility. No other life forms were detected. Calvin set it to continuously scan the facility before turning the platoon leaders. "All right, 4th platoon will stay here and begin bringing additional personnel. This will be our phobie." Scans indicated that the hall to our left is the reactor and engineering section. That's your area to sweep 3rd platoon. To our right is the crew quarters, hydroponics, and general storage. That's your zone, 2nd platoon. I'll take 1st platoon to check security, brig, command center, hangar, and medical, all of which are to our front. "Dismissed," he declared. The platoons began to go their separate ways as the rest of the Defiance's platoons began to filter in. Alex led his platoon through the wrecked hallway towards the reactor. Same signs of a violent struggle, but no bodies. Upon reaching the main reactor room, they found the door sealed shut and a great deal of dried blood on it. "All right, radio the FOB and inform them that the reactor room is sealed and the lining in the walls may be preventing an accurate reading on the bioscan," Alex ordered. Seta led her troops through the hall, clearing every room in the crew quarters. So far, it's all been the same, blood and ruined rooms. Once they reached the hydroponics bay, they found it empty, not even dead plants. She narrowed her eyes. She completely agreed with the chief. Nothing about this was right. Finally, they reached the storage bay. The door was broken open. She steeled herself for what might come. She looked into the room, another complete mess. Before continuing, she decided to report in. Radian into the phobe that we have reached the storage bay, and will proceed once they update us on the bioscan readings, she instructed. Calvin and Bo led first platoon through security. Everything was the same: blood, burn marks, and trashed. Once they reached the brig, they counted 3 cells. All had been broken into and were covered in blood. You know, I'm starting to think this place wasn't abandoned, but massacred, Bo said casually. Same here, Calvin replied. They entered the med bay and found that it was in the same condition as the rest of the base. So, they continued to the hangar. Upon entering, Calvin noticed the Coalition Type 5 interceptors littered throughout, as well as more blood and burns. They pushed further and reached the elevator to the command center. They managed to get the door open and found the lift destroyed below them. All right, Bo, you stay here, I'll take a squad up, Calvin said. Bo nodded as third squad equipped their grappling cables. Calvin launched his cable and began climbing. The tower wasn't massive, but it was a good 20-minute climb. Once they reached the top, they found that the command center hadn't been spared the fate as the rest of the facility. All right, Keela, get any and all intel off these terminals that you can. I don't think this was a pirate base, and I want to find out what the hell happened here. The Dogma armored fighting vehicle raced through the desolate landscape of Kepsis 6. Rodney continued to grin madly as he drove like a madman. He had long since drowned out the complaints of the others. He began laughing as he saw a hill fast approaching. "Who's ready for some airtime?" he shouted over the interior comms. The only thing he heard from the others was a garbled mix of "No, don't you dare" and "What does he mean?" before they soared over the hill. As they started to come down, he hit the emergency thrusters to slow their descent, so no one would be seriously hurt. Once they hit the ground, he began laughing maniacally. After about 10 or so minutes, they had finally reached the general area where the power source was coming from. But oddly enough, the scanners were now struggling to read anything. All right, eyes peeled? Something is screwing the sensors, and it sure as hell ain't pirates, he said, his voice now devoid of joy. Trala's feathers tried to stand, but were stopped by her environmental suite. Something about the captain's sudden change in demeanor unsettled her, and she could tell that she wasn't the only one. Casto and Sergios looked to each other before ensuring that their weapons were ready. The vehicle slowed down, and she could hear the turret begin to move around. *SL Zang*. The vehicle shook as the distinctive sound and impact of a medium-energy cannon rang out. "Contact, 7 o'clock, 200 meters, Rodney shouted. "Targets identified, 3 Coalition ATMBTs, Diaz called. "Engaging pissants," cried Takashima. *Shunk, shunk, 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 *. Trella felt herself vibrate slightly as the human began to return fire. Then she lurched to her right. They were going in reverse now. "6 more ATMBTs at our 12. It a fucking trap!" Rodney shouted. "Our comms are being jammed. Launch the red flare!" Trella felt the vehicle spin around as more energy cannon bolts flew past, while the human cannon continued to fire repetitiously. "Sir, I can't get through to the fob," said Alex's radio operator. Before Alex could reply, the doors to the reactor opened with a hiss. He turned, expecting to see a reactor, but only saw a battalion-sized element of coalition troops. The first few energy bolts flew past. "Open fire!" Alex shouted as he blew a hole into one of the coalition soldiers. "Back to the fob!" Third platoon began bounding back to the fob. The squads took turns providing covering fire as they made their way back. "I can't get through to the fob," Seda's RO declared, just before a bolt of energy slammed into Seda's shoulder. "Contact! Light them up!" she shouted as more energy bolts flew out of the storage bay. Seda threw an ionized smoke grenade inside and got back up. Once there was a sufficient amount of smoke, preventing the enemy from firing their weapons. She motioned for her troops to follow her. Second platoon began rushing back to the fob. Calvin paced on the command tower as Keela worked her magic on the terminal. "Chief, there is nothing on this terminal or anywhere," Keela stated confused. Before Calvin could respond, he caught a red glimmer in the corner of his eye. He turned his head to see a red flare in the distance. His eyes widened as he saw more flashes bellow the flare moving closer. "Back to the fob, move," he ordered. The squad packed up and began moving down the shaft. Calvin grabbed his flare gun and shot a red flare of his own out of a broken window. As he went to turn around, however, he caught a glimpse of something moving below. He glanced at the movement and saw an all-terrain heavy tank aiming a cannon up at him. *Saloom*. He ran towards the shaft, leaping onto his cable and sliding down. *Biwezang*. The command center blew apart above him, snapping his cable. He pushed off of the wall down towards the lift door, landing with a roll as flaming debris landed behind him. The others helped him up. Let me guess, a trap? Bo asked, already knowing the answer. Yeah, we need to move before that heavy tank can cut us off. It was outside the hangar, Calvin declared. The platoon began running back. As they neared the hangar, the distinctive sound of a coalition hover tank was absent. They entered the hangar indenting to run straight through. Asterisk S. Loam! Boisang. Asterisk. A large blue explosion erupted in front of them, knocking several Marines down, injuring them. The injured were grabbed and dragged back into cover as coalition infantry began to fill the hangar, cutting them off. O'Neill waited in the fob for status updates from the other platoons. Something didn't feel right about the situation. His head shot up when the sound of gun and energy fire filled the station. Get ready, everyone! He shouted, grabbing his carbine. The fob quickly filled with motion as the crew and Marines of the Defiance prepared for a fight. Third platoon burst into the room, followed by bolts of energy. Then second platoon entered. He turned, expecting to see Calvin and first platoon, but seeing nothing. First squad with me, we need to get first platoon. He ordered calmly, moving towards the hall that Calvin had gone down. Griggs watched as the two red flares fell from the sky, followed by the command center exploding. Not a moment later, the landing pad was surrounded by bolts of energy. His security personnel immediately returned fire while taking cover. Well, shit, can never have an easy mission, he stated, annoyed, firing his own red flare into the sky. Hopefully they ain't hitting us in space. Irene stared at the readings in slight dismay. 3 red flares. They were being attacked on multiple fronts by coalition forces. Miss Irene, we have 3 coalition ships entering the system. The ship's AI, Amy, called out. 2 frigates and a heavy cruiser. Irene groaned and activated the ship's intercom. All hands to your battle stations, I say again. All hands to your battle stations. Angel Squadron, prepare to deploy and provide cover for the away team. Irene took direct control of the ship and turned it to face the incoming fleet. She found it annoying that they decided to send 3 ships to try and destroy the most advanced warship in the galaxy. She gave a small and sadistic smile as all of the ship's weapons trained on the hostile fleet. Incoming transmission, Amy stated. Put it through, Irene replied. The screen came activated, showing a Quaratic, like the prisoner Tralla. Surrender, you are outnumbered, he stated confidently. Irene barked out a harsh laugh. You should have brought more ships, but if you want to throw more lives away, then go ahead. She cut the transmission and licked her lips. Greenock took cover with the other volunteers from his crew as coalition troops began firing into the FOBA, trying to enter the room. Sir, now is our chance. We can escape, said one of the volunteers. Did you miss the part where they shot at us? No hesitation? I locked eyes with one and he still shot at me, barked another. Greenock grimaced. I guess we're all traitors now, he thought, watching the fight ensue. He felt his heart clench as he watched a crewman of the Defiance get hit 3 times, falling clutching his burned side. The sound of battle was quickly drowned out by the cries of the injured human. Oh God, medic, the human cried out. It burns, mama! Greenock broke cover and bolted straight for the injured human. His crew watched in confusion as he grabbed and picked up the injured human. Carrying him back to his cover, he gingerly set him down. Greenock looked back to see a medic pinned down and unable to reach the wounded. I will repay my debt tenfold, he whispered before diving for the injured crewman's weapon. He grasped the weapon in his claws and glanced at the other humans, watching how they used it properly. He mimicked their movements and began firing the weapon back at the coalition troops. Sir, what are you doing? Demanded one of his crew. Greenock turned his head and scowled. Either help defend this position or drag the wounded into cover. That is an order! A moment later, the others leapt into action, some grabbing weapons from injured humans, while the rest helped drag the injured into better cover. O'Neill moved down the hall with his squad before stopping at the hangar, noticing the large amount of enemy fire that was keeping Calvin and First Platoon pinned. Well, it's just another one of those missions today, isn't it? He said, exasperated.